Oh, good morning. You've joined me here on the Cambodian-Vietnamese border. I am hot. I've been travelling for hours and I have absolutely no interest in talking to the people I'm travelling with. However, space race. The space race. Cold War and the space race. Very excited at the moment. You join me at Bavet on the Cambodian Vietnamese border at the old karaoke, which is now the Cape Karaoke Space Launch Centre. This little provincial town in Svay Rieng province, known as Bavet, it's launched its space probe as part of a Cold War with a town across the Vietnamese border called. So that's the Bavet space program. They're going to attempt a moon landing to prove that they are culturally superior. And breaking news. The local Cambodians have announced that they just got this into space. She reckons they got this into space this morning. In fact, you catch me in a little Sputnik. I'm in a Sputnik at the moment, in Da Nang. There was Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2 and Sputnik 3. There were 3 Sputniks. And then the Russians got the first man in space, putting a lot of pressure on the Americans. And what did Kennedy do? Promised to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The Russians putting their Sputnik into space, their Sputniks, created a panic in America. They lost their perceived superiority. They understood, the government understood that they had to make changes, so it introduced the National Defence Education Act, putting more focus on science and technology and maths, a bit like the STEM, science, technology and maths focus that we have these days. And they moved away from teaching creationism and they got serious about technology. A serious thing for the Americans was the perceived missile gap. They thought that they must be inferior, that they must be lacking some way in technology, in missile numbers, and it became a national obsession to close the missile gap. It became the raison d'être, the reason to be, in a way, for the American military in the Cold War. In 1991, sources revealed that in reality there was no missile gap. For the Americans, Alan Shepard became the first man in space, not into Earth's orbit. That was John Glenn. John Glenn became the first man into Earth's orbit. The Russians actually beat the Americans to the moon. They put an unmanned probe onto the moon, and then the Americans, as Kennedy predicted, put a man on the moon. Put men on the moon in 1969, winning, in a sense, the space race. Some people say that that was an illusion, that the whole thing was garbage that the American Apollo mission didn't succeed, and that it was all a Cold War hoax. But hey, who knows? Space race saw 2 decades of US-Soviet rivalry. The US gained an advantage by recruiting European Nazis. The Soviets pushed into space first with Sputnik. They put a probe on the moon first, a satellite around the sun, the first man into space. But the US claimed victory with the ultimate prize, which was a manned landing on the moon. And you would say 6 years later, the space race was ended by the US and USSR when they launched their first joint space mission, the Apollo-Soyuz, which effectively ended the space race. Thank you.